Saturday at 7:30 on BBC One.
This is BBC One. Now, an extended BBC News with Hugh Edwards in West London.
Tonight at 10, we're in West London, where 12 people have died and many are still missing after this residential tower block was destroyed by fire. It's thought Grenfell Tower was home to more than 500 people. The fire started at 1 in the morning and emergency services were there within minutes.
You need to ring 999. There is a dedicated line for this incident.
The fire started on the 4th floor and spread with terrifying speed, engulfing all 24 stories as people tried desperately to escape.
There was smoke everywhere, literally everywhere. There was people downstairs, there was bits of the block, the cladding falling off the block that was on fire. People screaming.
The fire was still raging hours later at dawn as fears grew for the many still unaccounted for.
It was engulfed by this time, it was engulfed and maybe 1 or 2 windows weren't and there was people in there. You know, you could see the silhouettes and then next thing explosions.
The London Fire Brigade struggled to reach the upper floors because of intense heat and falling debris.
This is a completely unprecedented fire. In my 29 years in the London Fire Brigade, I have never seen a fire of this nature, and I have seen many high-rise fires.
Residents have been taking shelter in nearby community centres. Some are still looking for missing relatives.
And she said, we can't do it because the smoke is killing us. Smoke is coming. Smoke is coming from the doors. She's keep covering it, but it's heavy. And that was the last time we've heard from her.
There's no word yet on the cause of the blaze. Residents say they had raised concerns about fire safety in the block. Dozens of people are being treated in London's hospitals. 18 are said to be in a critical condition. The block had recently been refurbished. Ministers have ordered urgent checks on buildings where similar work has been carried out.
Stay with BBC News throughout the day for all the developments from our correspondents at the scene of the London Tower Block fire.
Good evening from West London, where many people remain unaccounted for tonight after this 24-storey tower block in North Kensington was destroyed by fire. Police have confirmed 12 people dead so far, but that figure is expected to rise significantly as the emergency services deal with what they say is a complex recovery operation. Grenfell Tower was home to as many as 600 residents. Some of them had repeatedly raised concerns about fire safety in this block in recent years. Grenfell Tower is part of a social housing complex of nearly 1,000 homes near the big Westfield shopping centre in West London. There were 120 flats on 24 floors. Most of the residents would have been asleep when the fire started. The alarm was raised just before 1 in the morning and fire crews were there within 6 minutes. The cause of the fire isn't known, but the block had recently been refurbished and ministers have ordered emergency checks on towers where similar work has been carried out. Our first report tonight on the tower block fire is by our home editor Mark Easton, a warning there are some distressing images from the start.
Oh my God, they're screaming!
It is a tragedy that plays to our darkest fears.
Yeah, there was smoke everywhere, literally everywhere. There was people downstairs, there was bits of the block, the cladding falling off the block that was on fire. People screaming.
The fire started between midnight and 1. The screams from the flats and the acrid smell of burning, waking neighbours.
Just, you know, people jumping out literally and putting sheets down to try and get out of the building. Windows exploding, big massive pieces of debris falling to the floor.
We came here to see people jumping off, people calling...
You saw people jumping off?
Yeah, people have jumped off because they had no other option to.
How high up?
The top floor.
Saw someone jump and someone was on fire and they jumped too and he didn't make it.
So people have picked up their kids and thrown them out for the police to pick them up because there was no other way out the building.
Did you see that as well?
I saw kids standing at the window screaming, help me, I can't breathe, help me.
You know, and all these people that have lost people in their lives, and how that feels. Yeah, you know, my heart goes out to them.
The blaze tore through the 24-storey council block in North Kensington. Fire officers managed to rescue a large number of people and help others escape. On the 7th floor, this family were led to safety.
And the smoke everywhere, people screaming, the other neighbours were coming out. There was a fireman there going, get out, get out. So I ran back in, I'm just in my boxer shorts, I put my dressing gown on, I've grabbed a little girl, put her under my dressing gown to cover her face from the smoke, got my girlfriend up, ran down the stairs, we're on the 7th, as we're running down, we've gone to the 4th floor and it's pitch black.
This mother and her 6-year-old son were also trapped on the 7th floor. For a moment, she thought her best option was to jump through the window with her child in her arms.
For a split second, I had that temptation to jump over because the smoke was full, you know. So
You actually thought about jumping from the building?
Yeah.
And then your husband just grabbed you and took you out?
Yeah, so I called 911, so they sent us something. Otherwise, yeah, my second thought was, you know, let's just jump.
Many residents have complained to me that the fire alarm was too quiet to hear and that the blaze raced from the bottom to the top of the block in less than half an hour.
All the time we've lived there, they've said if there's ever any fires, you've got to stay in the flat because the fire can't penetrate the front door. But if we'd stayed in the flat, we all would have perished because, you know, there was no way we were stopping no fire.
The building had recently been refurbished, but tenants were worried and had warned the authorities they feared the block was a disaster waiting to happen.
We tried to take a lot of things to our local MP, and it looked like it has been ignored, but we were scared that this could happen because if there is one fire happen, we knew that this would happen.
Deep poverty and extraordinary wealth live side by side in this part of North London. The block was home to some of Kensington's poorest families. With dawn came grim, if expected, news that lives had been lost.
I'm looking for my brother.
Was he in the flat at the time?
Yeah.
Many people, numb with shock, frantically searched to find missing friends and relatives. This woman's sister and 12-year-old nephew were unaccounted for.
My sister with her son. Yeah, he's 12 years old. His name is Brooke. That's why I asked her, is Mrs.
12-year-old boy. As well as the smoke and the thick smell in the air, a tension, a numb shock hangs over this whole area in the 21st century, in a country with some of the strictest fire regulations in the world. A desperate tragedy like this just should not happen.
What floor are you on? Huh? 7, yeah?
Well into the morning, the crowds watching the horror unfold in front of them reported seeing people still trapped in the block.
I saw somebody there waving in a white...
in a white shirt?
Yeah, white shirt, yeah.
A man was eventually brought out by the emergency services at noon. This off-duty nurse helped tend to some of the injured rescued from the building.
I've seen some things, but today I can't even describe it. There's mothers that have come out and lost their children. There are firefighters that have come out injured that we don't know if they're going to even come out safe. People have lost their homes, children have seen things, people were jumping out the window. We just need to rebuild as a community now.
And how the community responded. People just did what they could. This woman went to her wardrobe, grabbed a bag of her own clothes to give to those who had none.
A bag of clothes, to me, is nothing when I could help somebody else, you know?
But this is a community where a lot of people don't have a lot, you know, so that kind of generosity is quite something.
I know, but, you know, they could be replaceable. My clothes could be replaceable.
This is terrible. It's a disaster for this community. But we are pulling together. The people that have nothing are here getting things for the people that have nothing.
Sadly, I can confirm that there are now 12 people that have died that we know of. This is going to be a long and complex recovery operation, and I do anticipate that the number of fatalities will sadly increase beyond those 12.
This is a neighbourhood that feels ignored. There's anger on the streets, people demanding answers.
This is your building, isn't it? And we've got a number of high-rise buildings here and, of course, in other parts of London. And they do have to meet stringent safety and fire safety standards. And in a refurbishment, there will be a thorough inspection by the fire authorities. So we will need to see...
Doesn't appear to have worked, though, does it?
Well, it clearly hasn't worked, and we will need to get to the bottom of what has gone wrong.
London's mayor promised there would be a thorough and independent investigation into what had happened.
My thoughts and prayers, as I'm sure the thoughts and prayers of the entire country, are with the family and friends of those in the building and affected by this tragic and horrific fire. Also pay tribute to the amazing emergency services from the fire service. We have more than 250 firefighters, many of whom have been here from the beginning.
Once the scene is secure, once the recovery is complete, then an investigation will take place into the cause of the fire and if there are any lessons to be learned. But until then, our focus must be on ensuring that the emergency services have what they need to continue with their harrowing work.
The streets of North Kensington are littered with ashes. The charred homework of a schoolchild blown from Grenfell Tower. This neighbourhood is also shrouded with grief from a tragedy that is far from over. Mark Easton, BBC News, North Kensington.
Well, throughout the night, many stories emerged of people who'd managed to escape from the tower block and watched the fire as it swept rapidly through the building. Many are now being sheltered in nearby community centres, and that is where the families and friends of those still missing are also gathering tonight. They're going from centre to centre to try to find any news of their loved ones. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning has been talking to some of the families deeply affected by this tragedy.
The air was punctuated with the sound of crying. Some have lost their home, others much, much more. They gathered outside the community centre, but the one thing no one could offer was good news. For the Shakir family, it was understandably too much.
My mum, my sister, her daughters and her husband. Yeah, they're all still in the building. Well, I don't know if they're out, I don't know, because we don't know any information.
Susan Shakir gave us this picture of her 3 smiling nieces, Myrna, Fatuma and 3-year-old Zainab. And what floor were your family on?
22nd, yeah.
And you haven't been able to contact them at all?
I phoned my sister when it was, when she was in there. All I could hear was screaming. And I was trying to tell her, get out, get the nearest fire exit. All I hear people screaming. I'm shouting my head so she can hear, So even the police officer heard me shouting on the phone, I really just wanted to go in there, basically, at least do something. I felt hopeless just standing there, a blanket at least. Let people jump out the window, be easy.
In the last few hours, Susan heard news that someone might have spoken to her family. She still doesn't know if it's true. Mohammed Neda's taxi sits idle, his family using it to appeal for help. The 57-year-old was on the 23rd floor, but for hours they've heard nothing.
My brother was on the phone to him for 2.5 hours. He was saying, help me, help me. The fire brigade was barricading them in because from the 4th floor, the smoke was going up the stairs. So they were saying the situation under control and everything will be all right. And then he just went missing, his phone not answering no more. We've been to all the hospitals as well and there's nothing.
Rashad escaped from the block, but other relatives are injured.
2 of them are still in coma because they made it, they had so much smoke in their body.
After the panic of last night, families today struggled with the silence.
They're missing my brother-in-law, his wife and 3 children. The children age is 20, a boy is 20, a girl of 16, 17, and a boy of 8 years.
Ahmed spoke to them as they were trapped.
I said, why are you not coming? She said, they asked us to stay in. I said, where is your husband? She said, he's talking to the emergency people. And then She said everything's all right, they're coming to get us, but the heat and the smoke is coming. And I said, look, get a wet blanket, put the kids on the floor and cover them and wait. And she said, we can't do it because the smoke is killing us, smoke is coming.
Tonight Ahmed said he believes his relatives could be in one of the hospitals. We were allowed to speak to survivors who'd escaped and reached the safety of the community centre.
I woke up at about 1:45 in my living room to help me. A woman screaming, my baby, my baby, my baby, and also the sounds of chaos when police were coming through the walkway, knocking on everyone's door, evacuate, evacuate, evacuate.
We're friends and I rang him, told him to get the hell out of there, this thing's going up.
Ed Daffin was saved by his friend Will, calling him and telling him to leave.
This smoke was so thick, you just couldn't see anything. And I got maybe 3/4 of the way, and then I was using my hands to feel against the wall, but I was actually began thinking to myself, you know, this is going to be me, I'm going to die of smoke inhalation here. And there was actually a fireman lying on the ground. And this fireman, he saved my life, to be honest, because he just sort of touched my foot and kind of led me where the fire exit was.
Ed was instrumental in raising concerns about the safety of the building years ago.
This accident never needed to have happened. If people had listened to what we were saying, what the blog was saying, what people, not just me, but what other members of the community were saying.
Well, inside the centre, those who are waiting for news or have lost their homes are gathered downstairs in the hall. As you can imagine, it is a fairly distressing situation. At times, people are sobbing as they wait for news that at this stage will possibly not be good news. They have no homes to go back to. And now it's not just the burnt-out building that looms over this community, but the fear that they will hear that many more of their neighbours have died. Lucy Manning, BBC News, West London.
Well, there's been lots of speculation today about the cause of the fire, but the cause of the fire is as yet unknown. As we've heard, Kensington and Chelsea Council say it will be fully investigated and that the tower block was regularly inspected. Some residents, however, telling us that they had been warning repeatedly about the risk of fire in this block. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports on what the investigation into Grenfell Tower will be looking at.
A death trap. That is what some residents believe Grenfell Tower was. Their high-rise home in ashes, friends and relatives dead, injured or fighting for their lives. They say, we told you something was going to happen, again and again. And the proof of that was not hard to find. This is a blog by the Towers Residents Association, which says, it is a truly terrifying thought, but the Grenfell Action Group firmly believes that only a catastrophic event will expose the ineptitude and incompetence of our landlord, the KCTMO, the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation, and bring an end to the dangerous living conditions and neglect of health and safety legislation that they inflict upon their tenants and leaseholders. It was posted last November.
We repeatedly reported concerns to the Tenant Management Organisation of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, including fire safety concerns, which were not investigated during the regeneration works.
They included concerns about this advice to residents to stay put inside a flat if there was a fire outside. There were also reports of faulty safety equipment, power surges and inadequate fire alarms. The tower is owned by the council, but in the 1990s, the Tenants Management Organisation took over. Professional managers joined by a board of tenants and councillors, including Judith Blakeman. She says she repeatedly argued on behalf of worried residents.
They just kept saying, we're very concerned about it, we've not been properly reassured, we would like an independent reassurance to put our minds at rest. You keep telling us, you, the manager, you, the freeholder, that everything's all right, but we want to see an independent assessment, and that was never provided. They were told it was not needed.
And it wasn't just the Grenfell. This is the Adair Tower. It has the same management. There was a fire here too in 2015, arson. Luckily, there was no loss of life. Following what happened here, the management was issued with an enforcement order by the fire brigade. It set out a string of failings to ensure preventative measures to properly assess the risk, failure to offer a well-marked escape route, and to have an emergency plan. People were angry then, now they're furious. Jose has lived here for 30 years. He has friends fighting for their lives after the Grenfell fire, just a mile away.
In this tower, we've had a fire. Trellick Tower had a fire. It's just happening too often.
3 towers, 3 fires?
Yeah, within a year.
And in your tower here, what changes were made following the fire in 2015?
Basically, they put signs up, which we didn't have. They changed the doors, the fire doors, which they weren't. And basically, that's it.
So, do you think that's enough?
No, it's not.
The Grenfell Tower was last given a comprehensive fire risk assessment 18 months ago during its refurbishment, when it was covered with new cladding. The management organisation refused to discuss the case in detail tonight, but did say this.
Any work that was done during the refurbishment was completed and signed off. And actually that's our position, and that's what we'll be able to show as we go through this inquiry.
But this fire, unprecedented in modern times, will be deeply disturbing for those living in high-rise flats. The government has already ordered a review.
We seek to identify towers that might be in a similar process of refurbishment, run a system of checks and inspections so that we as quickly as possible can give reassurance to people.
The investigation will begin once the exhausting task of putting out the inferno at the Grenfell Tower is complete. Getting to the bottom of why it spread so fast could take months. Tom Simons, BBC News, West London.
And with me here at Grenfell Tower is Mark Easton, our home editor. And sadly, Mark, the fire brigade still have work to do, clearly. And of course, there is then the extensive provision needed for local people.
Absolutely. This is very much an ongoing operation. You can see the building still burning now. The emergency services, we just saw exhausted fire officers in Tom's report just then. They're having to continue their work throughout the night and for days to come. The flames still burning. Those flats in there, that is the scene we know of some deaths. We don't know how many, and part of the job will be to try and recover the bodies, to identify those bodies, and try also to make sense of the confusion that there is right now with so many people not sure where people are. Are they alive? Are they in a hospital? Are they in some kind of centre somewhere? Families in desperate straits, you may have seen earlier in my report. So there's a huge job. What are we going to do to house 125 families? You know, children need to go to school. People need to wash. They need food. This is a huge logistics operation for the council. Only when people have got their heads around that can we really start thinking about what we've been talking about, some kind of serious inquiry, investigation into actually why this building behind us turned out to be a fire trap for hundreds of people.
Mark, we'll talk a little later then about the investigation and the challenges there, but for now, thanks very much. Mark Easton there for us. Well, Mark mentioning there those who've been injured, because more than 70 people were treated at 6 London hospitals. 18 of those, we're told, are still in critical condition. Most are suffering effects of smoke inhalation. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh has been looking at the response of the 100 medical staff who were called to the scene.
For the third time in as many months, London's medical teams responded to a major emergency. Paramedics, trauma specialists and the air ambulance were all involved, some of whom treated patients in the recent terror attacks. The key, to stabilise patients and get them to hospital.
At St Mary's, we are caring for 16 patients, 3 of whom are in a critical condition. At Charing Cross Hospital, we have 4 patients, none of whom are critical. We are continuing to care for patients who are primarily suffering from the effects of smoke inhalation.
Inhaling smoke can damage the lungs and airways and may also cause carbon monoxide poisoning. Specialist burns teams were on standby, but it's understood they did not treat any casualties. 12 hours after it broke out, a toxic cloud was still billowing from Grenfell Tower, leading to concerned residents handing out face masks donated by local firms.
People are breathing in the smoke here, and there's lots of soot, and there's also, toxic substances that have been used in the building that we're aware of.
And everywhere you look in the surrounding area are these blackened, sooty fragments. This children's playground is littered with pieces of debris which have floated down from the building and are what appear to be pieces of insulation from the outside of the tower block, and you can taste the soot at the back of your throat. Everyone's main concern is for the residents of Grenfell Tower, but there are worries too for those living nearby.
We found it hard to breathe, and we felt like we were tasting that smoke. So we don't know the damage this will have on our lungs. We have a lot of residents who are vulnerable, elderly people, people with severe disabilities, so we're concerned for them. Little children as well, children under the age of 5.
The hospitals involved say their accident and emergency departments remain very busy. They have asked the public to use walk-in centres or their GP unless it's an emergency, allowing them to focus on those injured in this appalling tragedy. Well, the very latest is that 34 people remain in hospital tonight, 18 of those in critical care, and some of the staff on duty at St Mary's in casualty here today also treated those injured in the Westminster and London Bridge attacks. You know, day after day, they simply don't know who is going to go through those doors, but whatever their injuries, they must and do respond. Hugh.
Fergal, thank you very much. And Fergus Walsh there for us, our medical correspondent. Can I just remind you, by the way, of the emergency number that's been set up for anyone concerned for relatives or friends here in this dreadful fire in North Kensington. And the Casualty Bureau, the number set up by the Metropolitan Police is 0800 0961 233. Once again, 0800 0961 233. Now, millions of people around the world live in high-rise buildings like this. The main question, of course, is how to keep residents safe. And as we've heard, Grenfell Tower was completely refurbished last year. Some fire safety experts have already been saying today that they might be thinking of the cladding on the building as a possible reason that the fire spread so quickly. Our science editor, David Shuckman, looks at the safety of tower blocks and how standards can be safeguarded and improved.
The wreckage of Grenfell House stands amid a cluster of tower blocks. Like many cities around the world, London has seen the rise of the skyscraper. Homes and offices perched high above street level with a host of safety rules designed to resist fire. But 8 years ago, a blaze at this tower block in South London killed 6 people. Southwark Council was fined for breaching fire regulations. And there are plenty of expert voices today saying that the lessons of what happened here at Lakanal House have not been learned.
Lakanal House demonstrated people were at risk in their own homes. The fire in West London last night, this morning, has demonstrated that they are still at risk in their own homes. These fires shouldn't be happening in 21st century London. We've got the ability to stop them from happening, and when fires do break out, to restrict them to small areas of flats or buildings.
One key question in the spotlight today is about the design of tower blocks and how they're meant to keep people safe in case a fire breaks out. Now, normally a fire hose can only reach about 15 metres. Grenfell Tower stands 67 metres high. In America, they rely on what's called active safety. Sprinklers fight fires in every room, but that can be expensive. The basic principle here, until recently, has been passive safety, designing the building to confine any blaze to a single room. Clearly that's failed. Investigators will want to know why. Another focus will be on the cladding fitted to the outside of the building, panels to improve insulation and the look of older buildings like Grenfell Tower. But dozens of fires have been linked to cladding around the world. 2 years ago, a skyscraper in Dubai caught fire and the cladding was blamed. New rules there have tightened up on the kind of materials that can be used. And investigators here will explore what role the cladding might have played.
In the UK, it has to be of what we call of limited combustibility, and I'm sure that's going to be questioned now after this fire, what exactly that means and on what these types of cladding systems are adding to the fire load on the building.
It was after the Second World War that councils answered the housing crisis by moving away from old terraced homes into new high-rise tower blocks. but their safety from fire depends on good design and careful maintenance. The London Mayor says people living in tower blocks will now need to be reassured, and fire professionals are shocked by how this blaze spread.
Literally every single floor was on fire internally. We don't usually see that. You see one floor, two floors, and then a hopping from floor to floor maybe over a period of time, but you would not normally see an entire facade on fire and then all the interior on fire at the same time. So that's what's very unusual.
So the fire overcame whatever safety features were in place. Last year the government promised a review into fire safety in tower blocks, but then delayed it. This disaster now makes that work a priority. David Shukman, BBC News.
Well, the scale of the tragedy here overnight meant that much of the week's political business at Westminster was put on hold, including an announcement on a possible deal between the Democratic Unionists and the Conservatives. As we heard earlier, Theresa May said that she was deeply saddened by the loss of life here in this fire. Jeremy Corbyn said the fire was the worst nightmare and said it raised questions about the resources given to local authorities who were responsible for these tower blocks.
Totally shocked by it. It's the worst nightmare anyone can think of. A fire in a tower block, and sympathy, support and solidarity to all those that are stuck in the tower or have managed to be rescued or who've lost loved ones or don't know what has happened to their friends and family. And a huge thank you to the fire service, police and ambulance and all the other emergency services that got there so quickly.
Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader there, speaking a little earlier. Let's talk to Alex Forsyth, our correspondent at Westminster. Alex, how would you summarise for us the response at Westminster today to what's happened here?
Well, Hugh, politicians, senior politicians, once again finding themselves paying tribute to the work of the emergency services after a major incident. Theresa May commended what she called the amazing bravery of firefighters, police and paramedics in what she said was an appalling situation, and that was a sentiment echoed, as you'd heard, from the Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn. But he also raised questions about whether enough had been done in the past when it came to preventative measures, particularly in the light of similar incidents. And he suggested that cuts to council budgets, some of which have responsibility for high-rise flats in their area, might have played a part. One Labour figure already suggesting there should be a public inquiry. So I think it's inevitable we will hear more about that in coming days. The Prime Minister has said there will be a full investigation in due course, but she said the focus now must be on the emergency response as the scale, the magnitude of this incident still develops, and of course in ensuring that all of those who are affected get the support they need.
Alex, I mentioned that politics more or less put on hold today for understandable reasons. Has there been any progress behind the scenes on talks between the DUP and Theresa May?
Well, there was an expectation that we may hear details of a final agreement between the DUP and the Conservatives because, of course, Theresa May and Arlene Foster, the DUP leader, met in Downing Street yesterday. But DUP sources said this morning they thought that would be inappropriate to announce any deal in light of what had happened. Now, Theresa May said herself the talks are still continuing. Senior government sources say to me they are positive talks and they are still on track. This is not a delay because, of course, there was no deadline. But it's worth bearing in mind that the government is unlikely to press on with a state opening of Parliament until that deal is reached. So there is some sense of urgency to this. But for tonight, understandably, events causing another pause in politics.
Alex, again, thanks very much. Alex Forsyth with the latest there at Westminster. We'll be back here in North Kensington shortly. In the meantime, let's join Rita for some more of the day's news.
Hugh, thank you. In the day's other news, Tim Farron has resigned as leader of the Liberal Democrats. He'd been in charge since July 2015. Earlier today, the party's Home Affairs spokesman Lord Paddock stepped down, saying he was unhappy about views expressed by Mr Farron during the election campaign. Our political correspondent Vicky Young reports.
Thanks all of you. He's been leader of the Liberal Democrats for just 2 years. Today, surrounded by colleagues, Tim Farron announced he was stepping down because of the focus there'd been on his Christian faith.
That I have found myself torn between living as a faithful Christian and serving as a political leader.
Could you tell us whether it's OK to be gay, Mr Farron?
He said he felt guilty that questions about his religious views on gay sex and abortion had been a distraction during the general election campaign.
Do you think that having gay sex or being engaged in gay sex is sinful? OK, look,
I'm not going to give you an answer to that question because I believe... Why not, though? Well, and I'll tell you why. I'm not going to give you an answer to that question, and that is because one's personal faith is one's personal faith. What counts is your actions and your beliefs in politics.
After days of pressure, he finally clarified that he didn't believe gay sex was a sin. Today, Mr Farron made it clear he felt he'd been forced to make an unfair choice between politics and faith.
I seem to have been the subject of suspicion because of what I believe and who my faith is in which case we are kidding ourselves if we think we yet live in a tolerant, liberal society.
Tonight, the Archbishop of Canterbury said Mr Farron was honourable and decent, and if he couldn't be in politics, the media and politicians had questions to answer. This has clearly been a very difficult decision for Tim Farron to make. At the election, he did make some progress, increasing the number of Lib Dem MPs. But some saw the campaign as a wasted opportunity, and they blamed the way he handled those questions about his faith. The party will now choose a new leader over the summer. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Some of the day's other news now. Borough Market in London has reopened 11 days after the terror attack that killed 8 people. Traders held a minute's silence to remember the victims and said returning to their businesses marked the start of a healing process for the market community. New figures show wages are continuing to fall behind inflation. Average earnings dropped by 0.6% for the 3 months to April. Unemployment fell by 50,000 over the same period. In the US state of Virginia, a senior Republican politician has been critically injured in a gun attack. Steve Scalise, a whip in the House of Representatives, was one of 5 people shot as they practiced for a charity baseball game. The gunman died after police returned fire. Well, let's go back now to West London and to Hugh. Hugh.
Rita, thanks. Well, within a few hours of this fire starting here at Grenfell Tower, people were arriving at the shelters around here. They've been set up in churches and sports and community centres, carrying huge quantities of food, clothes, water, handing out masks to people in the street to protect them from the acrid smoke. Our correspondent Elaine Dunkley tells us more now about the way that the local community came together to help.
This church hall a refuge for those who have nothing and for those who want to give. They've been overwhelmed with donations.
Today we've been out, we've bought a load of phone charges and we've given people the phone charges to help them call loved ones and to make sure they're all safe and everyone knows where everybody is. We've also donated some money. We've given some money to some families. Darren withdrew £1,000 out of his account. And we've been giving families £100 just to see them over the next couple of days.
I mean, it's amazing how everyone's come out in the community, and it just shows you how people will stick together in a time like this.
And how caring people are. They've been so caring.
This hall is full of provisions, from shoes to toiletries. People are sharing their homes, others are offering their time.
I see that London is still together, and regardless of your background, I'm from Brazil, and where you come from, everybody got together. It is an amazing feeling I have. In 15 minutes, this hall, as you see, it is absolutely full of clothes, baby stuff, food, water. It is amazing.
On another corner, just moments away from where people have lost their lives and others all their possessions, there are more supplies.
Well, we've had bedding, headscarves, toiletries, everything you can think of that people might want. All the front here is food. I have kids at the local primary and secondary. Texts are coming in, new centers that are open, where else people can take donations. I happen to be nearby, so.
I've got a 7-year-old daughter, and I was taking her to school this morning, and on that road where we walked to school, there's a very, very clear view of the tower and what was going on. Fire was sort of really going at that point, early in the morning, and she understands what's going on, and so after school we came by here and she wanted to help load donations from this box into the van that's taking them on to the shelters where people are being looked after.
This is an area where there is wealth and those who have very little. People from all backgrounds trying to do their best.
This community is very strong. Obviously, it's not about who's rich and who's poor, as you can see. You'll see people with suits and people with tracksuits. you know, just helping around and doing what they can do the best. There's also people here, whether it's, you know, from different castes and different colours. A lot of youth is involved as well, from what I can see. You can see a lot of students is running around, you know, picking up stuff. Yeah, me being from the Sikh community, trying our best, you know, making sure there's water everywhere.
Tonight, many of the centres are providing food and beds, but this is just the beginning for families who are now homeless. Well, just behind me there are rows of tables laid out with food, and people are still arriving at community centres, donating bedding, pyjamas and sleeping bags. The council says it's provided emergency accommodation for 44 households affected by the fire. Families with children, elderly residents and those who are most vulnerable have been given immediate priority. But there are so many families who are desperate here tonight, and many people who are working throughout the night offering them support.
Elaine, thanks very much. Again, Elaine Dunkley there, our correspondent in this North Kensington area. So nearly 22 hours after this terrifying fire started, there are relatives and friends, as we've seen, still urgently seeking people, in some cases, entire families who are still unaccounted for. And they're using all kinds of means, especially social media, to try to raise awareness and to try to make contact. Our correspondent, June Kelly, has been talking to some of them about those who are still missing.
Jessica Urbano is 12. She was with her family on the 20th floor of Grenfell Tower, but in the mayhem she became separated from them. On a borrowed phone, she told her mum she was on the stairs with other people. Her family have heard nothing since. Her aunt has posted this picture on Twitter with the appeal, "If you see Jessie, please get in touch." Tony Disson, a retired lorry driver, lived alone on the 22nd floor. At 3:30 this morning, he phoned one of his 3 sons and said he was being told to stay in his flat. On Facebook, one of his boys pleaded, "If anyone has seen my dad, could they let us know?" One family from the 17th floor has 5 missing. Husna Begum here with her grandmother and her grandfather, and with other family members, Abdul Hamid and Abdul Hakim. They were last heard of at 3 a.m. 82-year-old Ali Yawar Jafari has a heart condition. He made it down 1 floor in a lift, but then was told to get out and became separated from his daughter. She and her mother and sister managed to escape, but there's been no word of him. From the 14th floor, Dennis Murphy called his family at 1:30, saying he was struggling to breathe with the smoke. Half an hour later, he rang again, saying he was in a neighbour's flat. That was the last contact from him. Mariam El Gwari, who's 27, is a marketing manager and lived on the 19th floor with her mother. Her friends posted this picture with the message, "Please let's find her and her mum." Mo Tuku didn't live in Grenfell Tower, but with his wife and 3-year-old daughter, he was visiting someone. As Muslims, the family had gone there to break their Ramadan fast. His employers said simply, "Mo is part of the family." Some of the so many who are missing. The people who love them have been plunged into the most terrible torment. As desperate for news, they have been forced to wait for any information. June Kelly, BBC News.
And back here at Grenfell Tower, Mark Easton is joining me once again. Mark, what strikes you when you arrive in the area this evening and in the surrounding streets? You see supplies everywhere, people just want to help. There's a tremendous community spirit.
Absolutely extraordinary. Hundreds, if not thousands of people, as soon as they heard there was a problem, came out of their homes. They gave what they could, clothes, toiletries, food, anything, off their own tables. They've been at it all day, and they're really fighting for their neighbours. This is a very diverse community. It's also a relatively poor community in a very rich part of London. And people were saying to me, you know, they feel angry. They feel angry because they're convinced that this happened because that is a council block, and it wouldn't have happened if that was a mansion block. And I think as well as an inquiry, which will obviously have to look to see if any corners were cut, any mistakes were made, why it is in the 21st century that hundreds of people were living in what turned out to be a death trap. I think there will also be a rebuilding job with the community. They will have to try and find ways of rebuilding the trust between the people in this area and those in authority.
Mark, once again, thanks very much. Mark Easton there at Grenfell Tower this evening. And that's all for tonight on BBC News at 10. There's continuing coverage, of course, on the BBC News channel, and any developments they'll be reporting there as they happen. But now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Good night.